Imagine a silence so thick you can hear your own heartbeat. The date was December 26, 1996. In the high-altitude city of Boulder, a wealthy town in Colorado. The world was still frozen in a post-Christmas dream. The air was thin, biting, and silent. The massive red brick mansions of the historic district stood like silent guardians under a blanket of fresh snow. Colorful Christmas lights still twinkled on the pine trees, reflecting off the ice-covered windows. It was the quietest morning of the year. A morning meant for sleeping in, for children playing with new toys, and for the warmth of family. But at exactly 5:52 a.m., that peace was not just broken. It was slaughtered. The telephone at the Boulder Police Department shattered the stillness. The dispatcher, Kimberly Archuleta, picked up the line, her breath catching in the cold office air. She expected a routine call, perhaps a minor accident on the black ice of 15th Street. Instead, she heard a sound that would haunt her for the rest of her life. It was a woman screaming. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a jagged, animalistic sound of pure, unfiltered terror. "Help me, 911," the woman shrieked, her voice cracking like dry wood in a fire. "We have a kidnapping. There's a note." The woman was Patsy Ramsey. She was a former beauty queen, a pillar of the community, and a mother. But in that moment, she was none of those things. She was a victim of a nightmare that had just begun to breed. "What is your address?" the dispatcher asked, her voice steady, but her heart racing. 755 15th Street. Patsy cried, her words tumbling over each other. The dispatcher asked for the child's name. "JonBenét," Patsy shouted. "She is 6 years old." In that single, frantic exchange, the safe zone of the American dream evaporated into the freezing Colorado air. The knot was tied. To understand why this case paralyzed a nation, you must look at the family behind those red brick walls. The Ramseys were the embodiment of the golden life. John Ramsey was the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of a billion-dollar computer company. He was a man of quiet power, a pilot, and a provider. His wife, Patsy, was the light of the Boulder social scene. She was charismatic, deeply religious, and possessed the grace of a Miss West Virginia winner. They had the money, the status, and the beautiful children. Burke, their 9-year-old son, and the star of the family, JonBenét. But JonBenét was more than just a daughter. She was a living doll. Patsy had introduced JonBenét to the world of high-stakes child beauty pageants. With her blonde hair styled in perfect curls, her blue eyes framed by heavy makeup, and costumes that cost thousands of dollars, she was a champion. Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Christmas. She was a symbol of perfection in a world that craves it. The night before, Christmas night, the family had been at a festive party. They returned home late. Around 10 p.m., John carried a sleeping JonBenét up to her bed on the 3rd floor. The house was full of the smell of expensive pine, and the shadows of half-opened gifts. It was a fortress. The Ramseys believed that their wealth and their reputation were a shield. They believed evil lived in the dark alleys of big cities, not in the master bedrooms of Boulder. They were wrong. Evil was already inside. When Patsy Ramsey walked down the back staircase at 5:50 a.m., the house was still and cold. She was heading to the kitchen to start the morning coffee. But on the second-to-bottom step of the staircase, something caught her eye. It was a stack of 3 white pages. She didn't recognize the handwriting. She picked them up, her hands trembling as the first few words hit her like a physical blow. The letter was long, bizarre, detailed. It claimed that JonBenét had been taken by a foreign faction, a mysterious group from abroad. It demanded a ransom of exactly $118,000. Patsy didn't finish reading the 3rd page. She ran up the stairs, her heart thundering in her ears, to JonBenét's bedroom. The bed was empty. The covers were pulled back as if she had just stepped out for a moment. But the room was cold, empty. Patsy's screams woke John and Burke, a sound of agony that ripped through the mansion. John ran to the kitchen and stared at the pages spread out on the floor. As a CEO, he was a man of logic and numbers, but the numbers on this page made no sense. Despite the note's chilling warning not to call the police, Patsy grabbed the phone. She dialed 911. In that instant, the Ramsey mansion transformed. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene where the walls were beginning to talk. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of the Boulder police cruisers cut through the early morning fog. Officer Rick French was the first through the door. He found a scene of total psychological collapse. Patsy was in the living room, wearing the same red sweater from the night before, her face a mask of grief. John was pacing, his eyes darting toward the windows. The police were out of their depth. Boulder was a town that rarely saw violent crime, let alone a high-profile kidnapping. The crime scene was not secured. Friends and neighbors began to arrive, walking through the kitchen, touching the counters, and contaminating the very air that held the truth. The kidnappers had promised to call between 8 and 10 a.m. The FBI Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived and tapped the phone lines. The entire house went silent. Everyone sat in the living room, staring at the black telephone on the side table. 8:30 a.m. passed. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock. 9 a.m. Nothing. 9:45 a.m. The silence became a physical weight, pressing down on everyone in the room. No call came. In the world of kidnapping, silence is the sound of a plan gone wrong. Or, it is the sound of a lie being told. By noon, the atmosphere in the mansion had shifted from panic to a cold, creeping suspicion. Detective Linda Arndt noticed something strange about the ransom note. It was 3 pages long. Kidnappers are usually brief. "We have the girl. Give us the money." But this note was like a script. And even more chilling, it was written with a pen and a notepad that belonged to the Ramseys. The killer had sat in their house, using their paper to write a 3-page manifesto while they slept upstairs. And then there was the amount $118,000. It was the exact amount of John Ramsey's annual bonus. How could a foreign faction know a private corporate number? The shadow of doubt began to darken the polished hallways. Detective Arndt looked at John Ramsey and suggested one final, thorough search of the house. "Start from the top," she said, "and go all the way to the basement." John Ramsey nodded and asked his friend, Fleet White, to join him. They walked down the stairs into the basement. The air there was damp and smelled of old concrete. They moved past the laundry room, toward a small, windowless door at the end of a dark corridor. The wine cellar. John reached for the latch. He opened the door and turned on the light. In that second, the kidnapping story died. The ransom note was no longer a demand. It was the opening chapter of a secret diary, written by someone who never intended to let the girl go. What did John Ramsey see in that dark room? And why does the 3-page note seem to mirror the secret thoughts of the people inside the house? The nightmare was not coming from the outside. It was breathing right next to them. Most crime scenes are thick with a heavy, suffocating silence. But the Ramsey mansion was different. The house was screaming with words. While the detectives were still combing through the 15 rooms, a strange piece of evidence sat on the polished kitchen table, under the glare of a police flashlight. 3 pages of yellow, lined paper. To a rookie investigator, it looked like a ransom note, a demand for money. But to a profiler, it looked like something far more disturbing. It was a secret diary. It wasn't just a request for cash. It was a window into a mind that was performing a role. The killer wasn't just a criminal. The killer was a writer, an actor, and a director, creating a 3-page script for a movie that existed only in their own twisted imagination. Tonight, we aren't just reading a letter. We are stepping inside the ink to find the person who held the pen. Let's look at the cold, physical facts of this diary. In almost every real kidnapping in American history, the ransom note is prepared long before the crime. The kidnapper brings the letter with them. They want to get in and get out as fast as possible, because every extra second inside the house is a second they could be caught. But the Ramsey note was different. It violated every rule of criminal logic. Forensic analysts, scientists who examine crime scene evidence, discovered that the 3 pages were torn from a legal pad that already belonged to Patsy Ramsey. The pen used to write the letter, a Sharpie felt tip pen, was also found inside the house. Think about the terrifying implications of that. The killer entered the home, perhaps while the family was still at their Christmas party, and took the time to find a pad and a pen. They didn't just write a quick sentence. They sat down and wrote 3 full pages. Experts estimate it would take at least 20 minutes to write those words in that specific, controlled handwriting. 20 minutes of sitting at the kitchen table, while the family slept just a floor away. This wasn't an act of panic. It was a long, cold performance. The killer felt comfortable. The killer felt like they owned the room. When you read the words in the Ramsey note, you don't hear the voice of a hardened criminal. You hear the voice of a fan of 1980s action movies. The letter begins with a dramatic command. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. It sounds exactly like a line from a low-budget thriller. The writer claims to represent a foreign faction, a mysterious group of international terrorists. They use phrases like, "We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction." Linguists, experts who study the structure of language, find this incredibly suspicious. Actual terrorists don't call themselves a small foreign faction. That is a term a novelist would use to create atmosphere. Even more bizarre are the direct movie quotes hidden in the text. The note says, "If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies." This is a direct echo of the movie Dirty Harry. Another line says, "You stand a 99% chance of getting your daughter back if you follow our instructions." This mirrors dialogue from the movie Ransom. The killer wasn't writing from reality. They were writing from a killer's diary, filled with cinematic tropes. They were playing the part of the mastermind. But beneath the big, dramatic words, there was a desperate need to sound important. The letter was overwritten. It was too long. It was the diary of someone who wanted to be seen as more dangerous than they actually were. Now, we come to the most shocking part of the diary, the specific number. The ransom demand was not for $1 million. It wasn't even for a round number like 500,000. The kidnapper asked for exactly $118,000. This is the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that reveals the hidden truth of the ransom note. Why that specific, odd number? Just a few days earlier, John Ramsey had received his annual Christmas bonus from his company, Access Graphics. The net amount on his pay stub was exactly $118,118. Only a tiny handful of people in the entire world knew that exact number. John Ramsey, his accountant, and his wife, Patsy. How would a foreign faction from across the globe know the exact amount of a CEO's private Christmas bonus? The note was supposed to point the finger at outside terrorists. But the number pointed the finger directly back at the people inside the house. This wasn't just a ransom demand. It was an insider's diary. It was a piece of information that was far too intimate for a stranger to possess. The killer was revealing their own identity through their attempt to make the kidnapping look like it was about greed. The final act of the diary is the handwriting itself. The police asked John and Patsy Ramsey to provide multiple handwriting samples. John was quickly cleared. His writing was stiff and didn't match the flowing, dramatic script of the note. But Patsy was a different story. Forensic document examiners, experts who compare handwriting to identify authors, analyzed the note for months. They looked at the way the letter A was formed and the spacing between the words. While they couldn't say with 100% certainty that Patsy wrote it, many experts placed her at a high level on the certainty scale. The note was full of maternal mother-like traits. It was polite in strange places. And it used the word and over again. And then there was the practice note. Inside that same legal pad, investigators found evidence of a practice note. Someone had started writing the letter, made a mistake, and then started over on a new page. A kidnapper in a hurry doesn't do practice notes. Only someone who is carefully crafting a diary of deception takes the time to get every line perfect. The note ended with the mysterious initials, SBTC, Victory. For nearly 30 years, researchers have tried to decode those letters. Saved by the cross? Signature between two characters? Or was it just more nonsense from a script that was never meant to be real? The ransom note was a mask. But by the end of the first day, the mask was starting to crack. The police realized that the kidnapping was a fiction, a story written to cover a much darker reality. The true story wasn't on the 3 pages of paper on the kitchen table. The true story was waiting in the cold, dark silence of the wine cellar. John Ramsey had opened the door, and what he found there would turn the killer's diary into a death certificate. The body of JonBenét was not just evidence. It was the final, tragic sentence of the night. By 1 p.m. on December 26th, the hope inside the Ramsey mansion was not just fading. It was dying. The deadline for the ransom call had passed 3 hours ago. The air inside the 15-room estate was no longer a home, it was a tomb. The smell of stale coffee, expensive Christmas pine, and a growing, suffocating dread filled every hallway. The detectives were tired. The parents were shattered. Everyone was looking for an answer. But no one wanted to look in the one place where the answer had been waiting all along. In a real kidnapping, the victim is supposed to be far away, hidden in a secret location. But in the case of JonBenét Ramsey, the truth had never left the building. Tonight, we open the door to the wine cellar to find the moment. The kidnapping script was torn to pieces by a horrific reality. Detective Linda Arndt had been observing John Ramsey all morning. She noticed his movements were strange, he seemed distant, as if he were focused on a script only he could hear. She decided to break the tension that was paralyzing the room. She looked at John, and his close friend, Fleet White, and gave a simple, direct instruction. "I want you to search the house," she said. "Start from the top, and go all the way to the bottom." John Ramsey did not hesitate. He led the way down the narrow stairs to the basement. The basement was a labyrinth, a complex maze of cold rooms and dark corners. It was a place filled with festive Christmas decorations, old boxes, and a hobby room where the family's secrets were kept under lock and key. They moved quickly through the first few rooms, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. But when they reached the far corner of the basement, near the furnace, John stopped. He pointed to a small, windowless wooden door. "Let's check the wine cellar," he said, his voice flat. He reached for the latch, unaware that by opening that door, he was crossing a threshold into a 30-year nightmare. John Ramsey opened the door and turned on the light. The wine cellar was a small, windowless concrete box, and there, lying on the damp floor, was a white, hand-woven blanket. John lunged forward with a cry of desperation. Beneath the blanket was the body of his 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. She was not just sleeping. Her hands were tied above her head with a white nylon cord. A piece of black duct tape was stretched across her tiny mouth. In a moment of pure, blinding grief, John Ramsey did the one thing a parent would do, but a witness should never do. He ripped the duct tape from her face. He picked up her cold body and carried her up the stairs, screaming in a voice that didn't sound human. "I found her. I found her," he cried as he ran into the living room and laid her down on the carpet. Detective Arndt was horrified. The crime scene was now completely contaminated, ruined for evidence collection. But as she looked at the body of the little girl, she realized the 3-page ransom note had been a lie from the very first word. JonBenét had never been taken by a foreign faction. She had been murdered inside her own fortress, just feet away from where her family slept. The medical examiner's report was a catalogue of unspeakable horrors. JonBenét had not died quickly. The cause of death was strangulation, the act of squeezing the neck associated with a severe head injury. Around her neck was a garrote, a device used to strangle someone, made from a piece of nylon cord, and a broken paintbrush handle. The paintbrush had come from Patsy Ramsey's own art supplies. The head injury was massive, a fracture, a break in the bone that was 8.5 inches long. Even more disturbing was the timing of the injuries. Experts believe the head injury happened first, And then the strangulation occurred as much as 2 hours later. This was not a quick accident. It was a slow, methodical act of violence. But why? If this was a kidnapping gone wrong, why would a killer stay in the house for hours to construct a garrote? Why would they hide the body in the cellar, and then leave a 3-page diary on the kitchen stairs? The police realized that the entire crime scene was a stage. Everything was an overkill, a performance designed to mislead the world. And as the sun set on Boulder, the shadow of suspicion shifted from the outside world to the people inside the house. The media frenzy, the wild and disorganized activity of reporters that followed was like nothing America had ever seen before. The image of the beautiful 6-year-old pageant queen was on every television screen in high definition, and right next to her were the faces of John and Patsy Ramsey. The public turned on them almost overnight. Why did they hire high-priced defense lawyers immediately? Why did they refuse to be interviewed by the police for months? People pointed to the ransom note and the specific number of the bonus as proof of an inside job. Some believed Patsy had snapped in a moment of rage and staged the kidnapping to cover the truth. Others believed the 9-year-old brother, Burke, had accidentally hurt his sister, and the parents had protected him. The Ramseys paid a massive price. They lost their daughter, their reputation, and their peace. Patsy Ramsey passed away in 2006, maintaining her innocence until her final breath. The killer's diary remained an unfinished mystery for decades. But as the years passed, the world changed. The parents were no longer the only characters in this tragedy. Science was beginning to speak for JonBenét. The silence of the wine cellar had lasted for 29 years. But in 2025, the concrete walls are finally starting to crumble. New shadows are emerging from the evidence, shadows that do not look like the parents. The final chapter of this diary is about to be written by a force more powerful than any ransom note. The force of genealogy DNA, advanced genetic testing. Are we ready to see who was actually standing in that basement? In 1996, the answer is no longer a mystery of the heart. It is a mystery of the molecule. The date is today, December 25, 2025. Exactly 29 years have passed since the Christmas nightmare on 15th Street in Boulder, the wealthy city in Colorado. For nearly 3 decades, the world has looked at the JonBenét Ramsey case through a thick fog of rumors, cruel lies, and unfinished scripts. The red brick mansion still stands, its windows cold and silent. The pine trees still grow, but the secrets they witnessed that night have remained buried deep under the Colorado snow. Most people believed this case was a permanent, not a mystery that would simply never be untangled. But time is a weapon for those who know how to use it. While the world moved on to smartphones, social media, and new eras, the evidence in a cold storage room in Boulder was waiting for the future to finally arrive. Tonight, the killer's diary is no longer being written by a murderer with a stolen pen. It is being rewritten by the brilliant light of a laboratory microscope. The silence of 29 years is about to end. To understand where we stand in 2025, we must look at what remains of the people involved. Patsy Ramsey, the mother who stood at the center of the media storm, passed away in 2006. She died of cancer, still fighting with her last breath to clear her name. but never knowing who actually stood in that wine cellar that night. John Ramsey is now an older man, living a quiet life far away from the flashing cameras of the 1990s media frenzy, the wild and disorganized activity of reporters. The 9-year-old brother, Burke, is now a man in his late 30s, forever marked by the events of that Christmas morning. The house in Boulder has been sold and renovated, remodeled, or improved multiple times, as if new paint could somehow erase the history of the basement. For years, the investigation felt like it was trapped in a loop. The police had thousands of tips, but no smoking gun, the ultimate piece of physical proof. The public remained divided. Some still pointed fingers at the parents, while others looked for a ghost in the shadows. But as the human characters in this tragedy aged or disappeared, a new protagonist entered the scene. It wasn't a detective with a badge and a gun. It was the invisible, unbreakable code of life itself. In just the last few years, a scientific miracle has changed the face of criminal justice forever. It is called genetic genealogy, a technique that combines DNA testing with family history research. Back in 1996, forensic science, the use of science to solve crimes, was in its infancy. Investigators found a small, microscopic drop of blood on JonBenét's clothing that did not belong to anyone in the Ramsey family. For decades, that profile was run through CODIS, the National DNA database. But it never found a single match. The killer was not in the system. But in 2025, the rules have changed. We no longer need the killer to be in a police database. We only need one of their relatives to have taken a simple ancestry test. By using public family tree websites, investigators can now trace the DNA of a distant cousin or a great-uncle to build a map that leads directly to the suspect. This is the same incredible technology that captured the Golden State Killer after 40 years of silence. And now, the Boulder Police Department has confirmed they are using this exact method to untangle the JonBenét knot. The foreign faction was never a group of international terrorists. It was a single individual, whose biological signature is now being decoded in high definition. The evidence is whispering a completely different story in 2025. In 2023, a bombshell dropped that began to shift the entire narrative of the Ramsey case. Roy Rossello, a former member of the world-famous boy band Menudo, came forward with a shocking and brave allegation. He claimed that when he was a teenager, he had been assaulted by a powerful music executive, the same executive who had connections to the social circles of Boulder. This revelation added massive weight to the theory that a predator was operating in the shadows of the wealthy elite. Furthermore, new testing on the garrote, the device used to strangle found in the cellar, has revealed a touch DNA profile. This is the microscopic skin cells left behind whenever someone handles an object. This profile does not match John. It does not match Burke. It does not match Patsy. It points directly to a third person, someone who was in the house. Someone who knew the secret layout of the basement. And someone who knew the exact amount of a private Christmas bonus. The killer's diary was indeed an insider's job. But perhaps not the insiders the world has judged for 30 years. The knot is finally being pulled tight around a suspect. Who has been hiding in plain sight? We are now entering the final stage of this long and painful journey. The story of JonBenét Ramsey began as a nightmare in Boulder and turned into a national obsession, a state in which someone is completely filled with thoughts of one thing. We have seen the 3-page script of deception, the horror of the silent wine cellar, and the decades of suspicion that destroyed a family's peace. But in 2025, we are masters of a new world, a world where science can see what the human eye and biased minds missed. The killer thought they had written the perfect ending to their secret diary. They thought that by leaving a confusing note and hiding the body in a dark corner, they could escape the reach of justice forever. They didn't realize that every cell they left behind was a witness that would never die and never forget. The truth is no longer a matter of public opinion or a heated media debate. It is a matter of cold, hard biology. As we look toward the horizon of the new year, the question is no longer, who did it? The question has become, when will the handcuffs click? The diary is almost finished, and the very last word will be justice. This brings us to the conclusion of our second Untangled tale. We have unraveled the knots of the Ramsey mansion, finding the human tragedy that was buried beneath the sensational headlines. But the world of Untangled Tales is just beginning to expand its search. If you found the story of the Menendez brothers in our first episode gripping, then you know we do not stop until every single thread is pulled. The Menendez case showed us the deep trauma behind the masks. The Ramsey case is showing us the powerful science behind the secrets. There are so many more knots to untangle, from the dark secrets of Hollywood history to the cold cases hidden in the files of the CIA Central Intelligence Agency. We are here to find the truth, no matter how deep it is buried or how long it has been hidden. Please click the subscribe button to join our growing community of digital investigators. Hit the like button if you believe that every victim deserves a voice, even 29 years later. And ring that notification bell so you never miss a new chapter in our mission to untangle the history of America. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. Your time and your attention mean the world to us. And keep the light of truth burning. We will see you in the next Untangled tale. Goodbye.